You ever walk into your house and suddenly feel like it doesn't quite belong to you? Not in this someone broke in way, more like something's off, but you can't quite name it. Like when you leave your desk at work perfectly tidy, come back the next morning, and the staplers moved just an inch. That was my Tuesday. No burglar, no forced entry, just a weird shift in the air. The kind of thing you try to explain away with humidity, or maybe that the couch cushion's been flipped. But I hadn't sat on the couch that day, or flipped anything. I'd just gotten back from a regional HVAC conference in Dayton, which, as thrilling as it sounds, did involve 3 guys arguing for an hour about duct angles. I brought back a pen, a mug, and a lanyard I would absolutely never wear again. Deborah didn't ask how it went. She was too busy adjusting the same pillow on the sofa over and over, like it owed her money. Now, if this were one of those overly dramatic stories, this is where I'd say, and that's when everything started falling apart. But honestly, the unraveling was less a dramatic fall and more like one of those old VHS tapes that slowly got fuzzy and warped the more you played it. That was us, rewinding the same scenes, trying to make them mean something they didn't anymore. Deborah had this new thing going on lately, wood carving. Yeah, my wife, the same woman who once called me a sentimental lumberjack because I kept a broken chair from college, suddenly decided she needed to whittle. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, she disappeared for workshops at the community center. She said it helped her feel grounded. I said, just don't ground your thumb into the carving. I thought it was a phase. You know, the way she once tried juicing celery for health, or when she briefly flirted with making her own soap. The house still smelled like lavender regret. But this carving thing stuck. And not just stuck. She started filling the garage with half-shaped blocks and little wooden faces that all kind of looked sad. Or maybe confused. I don't know. If there's one thing I've learned from 8 years of marriage, it's that you don't critique your spouse's artistic efforts unless you want to sleep on the couch with the misunderstood totem poles. But what really started grinding my gears, quietly, like one of those clocks that's always a second off, was the change in her mood. Not dramatic. She didn't cry over dinner or slam doors or quote inspirational memes at me. It was subtler than that. Deborah was suddenly interested in everything but me. She'd talk about grain patterns and would nod like they were close personal friends. I even caught her sighing at a shelf in Home Depot, which, let me tell you, is not a look a man forgets easily. Still, I wasn't suspicious. I was confused. There's a difference. Suspicious men snoop. Confused men just squint a lot and say, huh, under their breath while trying to assemble IKEA furniture alone. Then came the incident with the garage door opener. I came home early on a Thursday. Not for any secret reason. I just finished a job quicker than expected and figured I'd surprise Deborah with a bottle of wine and my charming commentary on local weather patterns. But when I clicked the remote, the garage didn't budge. Nothing. Dead as my hopes of ever convincing Deborah to watch Die Hard with me. I got out, walked around to the side door, which was usually locked. This time, wide open. That's when I heard it. Not voices, not footsteps, but laughter. Not just any laughter. That soft, breathy kind. The kind of laugh that means someone said something just for you. I stopped cold in the driveway. Not dramatic. I didn't drop the wine. I didn't burst in. I just stood there, staring at the half-open door and wondering which part of this was the carving class. By the time I stepped inside, the laughter had stopped. The garage was empty, the air suspiciously scented with cedar and mild panic. A half-carved bust stared at me from Deborah's workbench with a smirk I swear wasn't there before. There was a cup of coffee, still steaming, beside it. But no sign of Deborah. That night at dinner, she was back to her usual self. Calm, pleasant, stirring her tea like she was hiding something in it. How was class? I asked casually, like I wasn't still thinking about the mystery laugh. Oh, you know, productive. She smiled. A real smile. Not the kind you wear for social obligations, but the kind that comes from a secret you're dying to keep. I decided not to press. I wanted to see what else she'd let slip. I figured, eventually, the truth has to stretch far enough to snap. A few days later, it did. My cousin, Tom, called me out of nowhere. Tom is the kind of man who once tried to convince our family that investing in alpacas was the future. So, you understand, I don't usually take his calls seriously. But this one came with an accidental payload. Hey Bree, crazy thing. I ran into your wife at that art gallery in town. I didn't know she was into wood sculpture. Who was that guy with her? Looked like they were putting on a show of their own, if you know what I mean. I didn't. So I said, "What do you mean, Tom?" He chuckled. "Oh, flirty. All up in each other's personal space." She introduced him as her carving mentor, but I've never seen two people stand that close and talk about chisels. I stayed quiet, mostly because I didn't trust my voice not to turn into something theatrical, and I was already halfway through painting the deck. Rage and outdoor maintenance don't mix well. So, no phone snooping, no lipstick on collars, no poorly hidden love notes. Just a very chatty cousin, a suspicious smile, and a mentor with excellent bone structure and likely a ponytail. Deborah never mentioned the gallery. She also never mentioned that her mentor looked suspiciously like the guy from the hardware store who once offered to help load bags of mulch into her car, while I was standing right there. I started seeing the pattern then, not just in her behavior, but in the carvings. Because once you know something's off, you start seeing it everywhere. The wooden faces in the garage, they were all the same man. Subtly, sure, but the nose, the jawline, even the smirk, each one of them looked like the same guy. It was like watching someone leave a breadcrumb trail. Only all the breadcrumbs were made out of oak and smugness. Still, I didn't confront her. Why? Because I was curious. I wanted to see how long it would take before she'd either crack or start carving full-size statues of him. Whichever came first. I started asking more questions. Innocent ones. When's your next class? Are you and the mentor working on something special? Do you think I'd be good at carving too? She played it cool, smiled, said I was more an observer than a creator, which is Deborah speak for don't touch my stuff. The part that really nailed it, though, came on a random Sunday afternoon. She left her notebook on the kitchen counter. Not a diary, not a planner, just one of those sketchbooks she used to plan her projects. I didn't mean to look, but when the wind flipped it open to a page filled with hearts and the initials JAM in the corner, let's just say the stapler had moved. And it wasn't humidity. I didn't need a confession. I had a sketchbook full of secrets, a garage full of look-alike busts, and a wife who thought she was too clever for breadcrumbs. So I did what any man with a sense of irony would do. I signed up for the next wood carving class. And that, dear reader, is when things got interesting. The thing about carving wood, as it turns out, is that it's incredibly boring. At least at first. Especially when you're pretending to be interested while standing between a guy named Jerome, who unironically calls himself a wood whisperer, and a woman with an eagle tattoo on her bicep, who spent half the class explaining grain direction like it was a secret government algorithm. The instructor, predictably, was not the rugged craftsman type you'd expect. No, he wore loafers with no socks, a blazer over a t-shirt, and had the kind of hair you only get if you own a special brush made out of horse eyelashes or whatever influencers use these days. His name was Julian Martin, and yes, I later learned he spells Julian with an E in the middle because it balances better visually. You can imagine how much I love that. So there I was. Brian Renner, HVAC tech, part-time sarcasm enthusiast, pretending I cared about Scandinavian joinery in order to learn if my wife was actually making owl figurines in these classes, or just making a fool out of me. Deborah didn't notice me the first night. The room was full, and she was too busy showing Julian, her latest piece, which, at a glance, looked like a tree branch having an identity crisis. He stared at it like she'd handed him a Renaissance masterpiece. He even said, "Your negative space choices are bold," which I'm pretty sure means, "This is a mess, but I don't want to insult you because I like the attention." I stayed quiet, observed, whittled a block of wood until it resembled nothing in particular, which apparently earned me compliments for being abstract. Over the next few sessions, I did what any reasonable man in my situation would do. I got better at pretending. I smiled, nodded, laughed at Julian's jokes like I wasn't planning an internal PowerPoint presentation titled, "So this is what betrayal in boat shoes looks like." Deborah kept her cool. She was polite, not overly affectionate with Julian, not inappropriate in front of the class. But there were tells. Tiny ones. The way she adjusted her posture when he walked over. The way her voice shifted, just slightly higher pitched. The way her carving projects went from, "I'm still learning," to "here's an interpretive bust of a man who looks suspiciously like Julian if he played tennis." I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she just admired him. Maybe he represented the mysterious creative energy she thought she'd missed out on while married to a guy who fixed air ducts and made spreadsheet jokes. But then came the Thursday night assignment swap. Julian, in what he called an experiment in shared expression, paired us all off to finish each other's pieces. An exercise in trust and artistic connection, he said. I'm pretty sure it was also an excuse to find out who in the class was secretly terrible. I got paired with Jerome, who had carved a spoon so large it looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Deborah, naturally, got paired with Julian. What followed was 10 minutes of playful creative banter between the two of them while they worked on what Deborah claimed was a conceptual bird feeder. To me, it looked like a hollow box with a dramatic slant, but I'm not an artist. What I am, however, is observant, and that's when I saw it. Julian handed her a small chisel from his apron pocket. Seemed harmless, except it wasn't hers, and he did it with the kind of lingering hand touch that made my left eye twitch. Later that night, as everyone was packing up, I noticed Julian reach into his pocket again, this time slipping something into his own bag that wasn't wood-related. A small notebook. Nothing unusual, until Deborah leaned over and whispered something. He smiled, zipped the bag, and said, "It's our secret project." She giggled. That weird, breathy giggle again. The one I hadn't heard at home in months. Now, I've never been one for dramatics. But when a man says secret project and your wife reacts like she just got asked to prom, you start connecting dots faster than you ever did in high school math. The next week, I skipped the class. Didn't even pretend to have a reason. I just didn't go. I wanted to see what she'd say. She didn't. Not a word. She came home a little later than usual, mentioned something about staying after to clean up, then went into the bedroom to shower and listened to a podcast about Scandinavian furniture design. Alone, on the couch, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time we'd had a conversation that didn't involve weather, work, or which container she could throw away without starting a 3-day passive-aggressive war. That Saturday, I paid a visit to the community center on my own time. Not to confront anyone. I had a different plan. The building was open for a charity event, and the carving room had been temporarily turned into a makeshift gallery. The students' best works were on display. Deborah had submitted 2 pieces, one labeled Man in Transition, and the other Unfinished Form. The Man piece looked like Julian with a beard. I knew it was him because it had the exact same weird chin dimple I once mocked during dinner. The Unfinished Form was more abstract, but something about the slope of it resembled a body leaning, reaching towards something not shown. I glanced at the guest book on the table nearby. Visitors were supposed to leave comments about the artwork. Most were the usual stuff. Wonderful expression. So creative. Love the textures. But on page 2, in handwriting I recognized from Deborah's grocery lists, there was a note that read, "True connection lives in silence. No words needed when the hands understand each other." I didn't need a translator. I didn't need a hidden camera. I didn't need a dramatic reveal with thunder clapping in the background. I needed aspirin. I closed the book and walked out. Not angry. Not crushed. Just done. At home, I opened the garage and stared at all her wooden projects, now stacked in corners like forgotten experiments. The truth wasn't hiding in her phone or under a bed. It was standing in plain sight, carved and varnished for the world to see. The next morning, I signed up for the intermediate carving class. She noticed. "You're going back?" she asked, holding her coffee like it wasn't suspicious. "I'm hooked," I said. "I feel like I've just scratched the surface. I want to go deeper. Find a grain." She gave me a look I couldn't quite place. Confusion mixed with curiosity. Maybe guilt. Or maybe she was wondering if I knew. I smiled, poured my own coffee, and said nothing. Because the real project had already started. There's a particular moment in every man's life when he realizes he's not actually the main character in his own story anymore. For me, it came while watching my wife rearrange a shelf of decorative bowls as if the next 3 hours depended on the exact degree each ceramic was facing. She was in sweatpants, humming some aimless tune that didn't sound like anything a person should hum unless they were actively gaslighting a choir. I stood there holding a receipt in my hand. Not for bowls, not for groceries, not for anything practical. It was for a beginner's wood carving kit, purchased by Deborah, shipped not to our house, but to a P.O. box she had never mentioned. Now, I'm not Sherlock Holmes. I don't own a pipe. I don't have a network of informants. But even I could put 2 and 2 together and get a solid 4. Especially when the person you've been married to for almost a decade suddenly starts rerouting packages like she's training for an underground smuggling operation involving chisels, and self-esteem. That Sunday morning, while she alphabetized the spice rack with the intensity of someone hiding from a small existential crisis, I figured it was time. No yelling, no dramatics, just two adults and the growing absurdity of what their marriage had become. "Hey," I said, leaning casually on the counter like someone who hadn't just spent 3 days pretending not to know their spouse was moonlighting as a sculptress of secrets. She didn't look up. I need your opinion on something." I held up a piece of paper. Not the receipt. That was tucked safely in my jacket pocket like a polite little time bomb. This was something else. A flyer for a local art showcase titled "Carve Out Your Truth." Because irony, it turns out, isn't subtle when it's printed in large bold font. She glanced at it for 2 seconds. "Oh, that's for Julian's studio," she said, neutral, like she was commenting on the weather and not her side hustle and betrayal. "Yeah, you're listed here," I said, tapping her name. "Right under Julian Martin. And just above, Found Object Abstraction by Carla N. Exciting company." She nodded, still too casual. "It's just a student submission. Everyone from the class was encouraged to enter." "Right, just students," I said, not blinking. "Do students usually get private meetings with the instructor at off-site locations?" Now she blinked. Not fast, just once slow. The kind of blink that says, "I need a new excuse. Give me 3 seconds to invent one that doesn't sound like a game show answer." "He's mentoring several of us," she said, aiming for breezy. "It's part of the extended curriculum." "Extended curriculum," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling Thursday nights at the Riverwood Co-op?" Because I passed by there last week. Oddly specific place for wood carving mentorship, given the complete lack of wood. Or tools. Or people. She paused, and I swear I could hear the gears turning in her head. But instead of producing logic, they spat out something closer to improv theater meets a midlife distraction. "Brian," she said, placing her hands on the counter like she was trying to appear calm, but forgot what calm actually looked like. "I think you're overthinking things." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I think you're underexplaining them." A beat of silence. She glanced back at her perfectly aligned spice rack like maybe Cinnamon would step in and offer a defense. I pulled the receipt from my jacket, laid it on the counter. "This," I said, tapping it, "was delivered to P.O. Box 947. Not our address, not your work, not your sister's place, but it was under your name. You bought tools, Deborah. Extra tools, despite telling me you only ever used the class set." She picked up the receipt like it might transform into something else if she held it long enough. "It's a gift," she said finally. "For who?" I asked, genuinely curious now. "Is this like Secret Santa but year-round and deeply awkward?" "I don't have to explain every single purchase to you," she said, which, in a healthy marriage, would be true. In this case, it was less independent spouse energy and more, "I've created a second life and forgot to keep track of the paperwork." I looked at her, really looked, not like a husband looking at his wife, but like a man who just realized the person across from him knows how to lie without blinking. "Deborah," I said, "are you seeing Julian?" She made a face. Not shocked, not offended, just bored, like I'd asked if she wanted to switch laundry detergents. "That's ridiculous," she said. "So no." I didn't say no. That was it. That was the moment. Not the receipt, not the co-op, not even the creepy familiarity of her sculptures. It was that sentence. The kind of sentence you only say when you're either stalling or auditioning for a role in a low-budget courtroom drama. "You didn't say yes either," I said, keeping my voice steady because somewhere in this bizarre exercise of passive-aggressive charades, I decided I wasn't going to be the dramatic one. "I don't have to play this game," she muttered, turning away. "That's fine," I said. "But if we're not playing games, maybe you can explain why Julian signed your guest book entry at the exhibit with 'See You Tuesday.' Same time, same bench, and a little doodle of what I'm assuming is a poorly drawn wine glass." She froze. Not dramatically, just enough for me to know she hadn't expected me to go full Sherlock. "Rookie mistake. You read the guest book?" It was on a table, labeled Public Comments. "I'm not a hacker, Deb. I'm a guy who showed up to support his wife and left wondering why her instructor's handwriting looks like it's been practiced for romantic grocery lists." She sighed, not because she was tired, but because she was out of wiggle room. And Deborah, bless her, had built her life on having room to wiggle. "What exactly do you want from me, Brian?" "An answer," I said. "A real one." Just one. She didn't answer. She stared at the counter like it might open up and reveal a better version of herself underneath. Finally, she shrugged. That was it. A shrug. Like we'd just disagreed over paint colors. I nodded. Good talk. I walked to the hallway, grabbed my keys, and paused at the door. She didn't follow. She didn't call my name. She didn't even pretend to care that I was leaving the house without telling her where I was going. So I left. Not to cool off. Not to think. But because the conversation was over, and I was no longer interested in pretending it had ever really started. If revenge were a dish best served cold, I figured I might as well played it with precision and presentation. Not because I was angry. Anger implies some lingering hope. No, I was operating in that beautiful realm of detached clarity, where everything feels like a group project and you've just realized you've been doing all the work while someone else scribbled their name on the top and took credit. The idea came to me while I was cleaning the junk drawer. Yes, the infamous drawer. The one filled with expired coupons, random screws that fit absolutely nothing, for different types of tape, and 3 identical sets of keys that unlock nothing in this reality. I wasn't digging for clues. I just needed scissors. And I found a stack of envelopes. Business envelopes. Deborah's name on all of them. All unopened. All from the local arts fund committee. Curiosity's a dangerous thing in marriage, especially when it intersects with boredom and access to your spouse's forgotten paperwork. I opened 1, then 2, then 6. Apparently, Deborah had applied for a local arts grant using a project proposal titled Modern Expression of Reclaimed Identity Through Wood, which sounded less like a carving concept and more like a therapy brochure, but sure. Here's the kicker. She got it. A $2,000 grant. Paid in installments. First half already deposited. The second pending a final presentation at the end of the quarter. I stood there holding the last letter and couldn't help but laugh. While I was out balancing ductwork and explaining to people why a filter should be changed more than once a decade, my wife was collecting money to sculpt her way through a midlife adventure, with Julian and his tragic blazer rotation nodding along. The next day, I made a plan. Not a dramatic one. No shouting matches, no social media blasts, no personalized t-shirts. Something more Deborah-friendly. Subtle. Passive in appearance, active in execution. I started with the garage. She hadn't been using it much lately, said the lighting was uninspiring. So while she was out, presumably redefining boundaries at the carving class, I rearranged everything. Tools moved. Projects relocated. Half-finished sculptures tucked into boxes and labeled archive. I even vacuumed. Twice. By the time I was done, the garage looked like a workspace rented by someone who paid bills on time and didn't use chiseling as foreplay. She came home, peeked in, and blinked. You cleaned? She asked, like I'd just declared an intention to run for mayor. Thought it might help you focus, I said. You've been so busy lately. She nodded slowly, probably wondering if I'd cracked or become an overly polite ghost. The next part was trickier. I needed access to her art portfolio. She kept it in a shared cloud folder, linked through our home desktop, because Deborah, for all her mysterious P.O. boxes and emotional affairs, never remembered to log out of anything. And there it was, sketches, artist statements, project timelines. One document caught my eye, artist bio and presentation outline for final showcase. A 7-page stream of consciousness where Deborah described her work as a transcendent metaphor for liberation from prescriptive roles, which, as far as I could tell, meant I used to be married to a man who did his own taxes, but now I sculpt busts of someone who quotes poetry during coffee. So, naturally, I edited it. I didn't delete anything. That would have been rude. I just added some highlights. A few annotations. For example, under her section titled Creative Influences, I inserted, many late evenings were inspired by my mentor's passionate commitment to detail, especially in private settings, often on Tuesdays. Under Personal Reflection, I added, this work represents an ongoing dialogue with truth, shaped by intimate critiques and shared late-night revelations. And in the artist bio, right next to where she listed our home address, I added, currently exploring the intersection of self-discovery and relationship restructuring, with unexpected support from my still legally wed husband, Brian. I saved it, re-uploaded it, left everything exactly where it had been. 3 days later, I received the invitation to the final showcase. Printed. Formal. The whole deal. Deborah had submitted it without mentioning a word to me. Probably assumed I wouldn't want to go. Probably right. If I were the Brian she remembered, accommodating, practical, fond of fix-it lists and Sunday bulk shopping. But the new Brian? The one who cleaned the garage with a vacuum attachment he didn't even know he owned? That Brian RSVP'd immediately. Front row. On the day of the event, she left the house early, dressed like someone who read too many lifestyle blogs about looking intellectually effortless. I waited 15 minutes, then drove over myself. The gallery was a modest space tucked between a vegan bakery and an overpriced glasses store. Inside, white walls, spotlights, whispering attendees who nodded solemnly at sculptures that looked like firewood with ambition. Deborah stood near her display, beaming as Julian hovered nearby with a glass of sparkling water like he was toasting his own ego. I waited until the speeches started, until the organizer announced her name, and she walked up with the confidence of someone who'd never been publicly corrected. Then the slideshow began. And there it was, her presentation. My edits. Live on a screen. Projected in bold text for an audience of art donors, bored retirees, and one husband in the second row wearing a shirt she'd told him was too graphic for events. It said, "I make things that last." She froze by slide 3. Her eyes scanned the room. Then the screen. Then the back, where I was sipping complimentary sparkling water with a very supportive nod. She rushed through the rest of it, like someone speed-reading terms and conditions. Skipped half the slides. Didn't take questions. Applauded herself politely, and stepped off stage with the energy of someone about to file a complaint with the universe. Later, at home, she walked in and dropped her bag on the floor. Looked at me like I'd performed a one-man show about betrayal and charged admission. "You changed my presentation." "I edited it," I said. "For clarity. You know how much I care about communication." She stared, hands on her hips. "You embarrassed me." I shrugged. "If it makes you feel any better, I don't think Julian noticed. He seemed busy adjusting his scarf." "You made me look ridiculous." "No," I said, standing. "You did that. I just made sure the spotlight worked." She didn't respond. Just stared, probably waiting for me to apologize or admit to hacking. I didn't. I picked up my jacket, tossed her the mail, and said, "By the way, the committee was impressed. They sent you a check." She opened the envelope. $1. A ceremonial check. Symbolic. For participation. No grant. No showcase commission. Just validation that sometimes your project isn't quite what you promised. She sat down in silence. I walked to the door. Not out of anger. Just done. There's nothing quite like the quiet that follows a very public unraveling. It's not the soft kind of quiet that feels peaceful. It's the kind where even the dishwasher sounds like it's judging you. I hadn't said much in the days after Deborah's showcase. She hadn't either. It was a mutual truce of silence, like two people living in a house where neither wants to admit who left the window open during a storm. She didn't try to spin what happened. That was the surprising part. No big speech. No emotional monologue about how I didn't understand her journey as a woman in transition. No listing of all the ways I'd apparently failed to support her creative rebirth, as she once called it during a conversation that felt more like a TED Talk nobody asked for. Instead, she moped. Not dramatically. Deborah didn't do dramatic. She did controlled sulking. Slightly more aggressive dish stacking. Longer than usual sighs while scrolling on her phone. The occasional drawer shut just a touch harder than necessary. It was like living with a very polite earthquake. I wasn't avoiding her. I just didn't see the point in poking a broken lamp to see if it still turned on. But after 4 days of this increasingly uncomfortable interpretive dance of mutual avoidance, she finally spoke. It was a Thursday. The kind of Thursday where everything felt beige. Beige sky. Beige mood. Beige marriage. She stood in the doorway to the living room holding a folder. Not dramatic. Just a plain folder. She said, "Can we talk?" I muted the TV. Not because the program was worth pausing. It was a rerun of something where people yell about furniture, but because I figured I might as well listen without background commentary. "I'm guessing this isn't about taxes," I said, nodding to the folder. She didn't smile, but she did sit down. "It's not what you think it is," she said. "Is it what I know it is?" I replied. She opened the folder and handed me a single sheet of paper. Not a letter. Not a dramatic confession. Just a list. Each line had a date, a location, and a time block. It looked like something a middle manager would put together to keep track of meeting rooms. These are all the times I met with Julian, she said. I looked at the list. It went back almost 4 months. Some sessions lasted 30 minutes. Some were closer to 2 hours. All in public spaces. The co-op. A shared studio downtown. Once, at the public library. You kept a record, I said. I thought if it ever came up, I could prove it wasn't what you think. That's very organized, I said. Do all emotional affairs get logged in spreadsheets now? Or was this a special edition? She didn't flinch. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't romantic. Okay, I nodded. So just inspirational. In a way that required hiding receipts and scribbling notes in guest books about silent connection. Deborah looked down at her hands. Still no tears. Still no dramatics. Just a quiet resignation that looked suspiciously like guilt's more introverted cousin. I know I crossed a line, she said finally. That's good, I said. I was starting to think you'd convinced yourself this was a very intense internship. She leaned back on the couch. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't want it to become something complicated. I just wanted something for myself. That didn't involve bills, or your job, or the house, or people asking me if I'm going to have kids. That's fine, I said. You're allowed to have things for yourself. But you're not allowed to drag me into a one-man play called My Husband Doesn't Get Me. So let me sculpt my way into someone else's attention span. I never planned to leave, she said quickly, as if that was supposed to be comforting. That's nice, I said. So I was still plan A? She looked like she wanted to say something comforting. Maybe something about how I was stable, or safe, or good. But I could already feel the insult hiding under those words. Don't, I said. If you're about to compliment me like a Yelp review for a decent laundromat, let's skip it. She didn't argue. Instead, she folded the folder closed and placed it on the table. I get it, she said. You want out. I don't want anything, I said. I just stopped pretending we're building something here. Because from where I'm sitting, I think we're carving from two different pieces of wood, and neither one of us bothered to measure first. She gave a faint smile. The kind people give when they've lost, but they're trying to act like they never really wanted to win in the first place. Do you want me to move out? She asked. I think we're past the want stage, I said. It's more of a practical inevitability at this point. There was a long pause. She didn't cry. Neither did I. This wasn't the kind of moment that earned tears. It was more like signing the return slip on something you thought would fit your life, but ended up pinching in all the wrong places. I'll start packing tomorrow, she said. Take your time, I replied. No one's rushing. Just label the boxes. I don't want to spend 6 months opening containers of forgotten sculpture faces. She almost laughed. It was short, dry, but it was something. Will you tell people? She asked. I'll tell them we realized we were both too good at ignoring each other to make a team, I said. That sounds honest without being a headline. She nodded, like that was as good a summary as any. Then she stood, picked up the folder, walked upstairs without looking back. I sat on the couch for a while after she left. The dishwasher clicked off in the kitchen. A bird hit the window and flew away. The rerun on TV resumed itself, and nobody noticed. And I just sat there, not broken, not angry, just free from pretending. If anyone ever tells you that the end of a marriage is like the closing of a chapter, you should probably check if they've ever actually closed a book before. Nothing ends neatly. Pages get ripped. Bookmarks fall out. Sometimes, you don't even remember where you left off, only that it wasn't where you planned. It took Deborah exactly 3.5 days to move out, which I assume is some sort of record for people who own 12 pairs of identical beige flats and 5 sets of tools she never actually used. She packed in silence. No commentary. No passive-aggressive sighs. Just box after box labeled in her precise handwriting. Office stuff, craft supplies, Brian's books, not mine, bathroom, mine, don't touch. She didn't ask for help. I didn't offer. I assumed we were both trying to keep the score at 0. It's easier that way. Less mess. Less need to explain things to mutual friends who think any breakup should involve crying or a dramatic porch scene. We didn't do porch scenes. We barely used the porch. On the day she left, she stood by the door holding one last bag. It was striped, like something you'd take to the beach if you were the kind of person who brought artisanal sunscreen and wrote in a journal. I didn't ask what was in it. Well, she said. Yep, I replied. There was a pause. You'd think someone might say something memorable at that point, like they do in movies. But we weren't movie people. We were Sunday laundry and catalog mail kind of people. She nodded. I nodded back. And then she left. The silence that followed wasn't the uncomfortable kind anymore. It was more like when your phone dies and you realize you're okay with it. I didn't feel sad. Not really. I didn't feel triumphant, either. That would have required energy. I just felt done. Over the next week, I started adjusting. Nothing major. Just small things. I took down the calendar Deborah had mounted to track joint goals, which, funnily enough, had mostly been lists of community events I never agreed to. I deleted the shared cloud drive, which she hadn't updated since February. I changed the Wi-Fi password, not out of spite, just because she'd picked the old one, and it included the word journey. No grown man should log into Our Journey 2021 every day. People started finding out in waves. My sister called to ask if we were still coming to her housewarming. I said, "It'll just be me now." She asked what happened. I told her the truth. She found a new muse. He wore linen and believed in crystals. My boss noticed something was different when I started showing up to work earlier than usual. "Everything okay at home?" he asked. I said, "I'm the only one there now, so statistically, yes." He nodded and went back to adjusting the thermostat for the fourth time that morning. Even Carl from the warehouse, who once tried to microwave a metal mug, pulled me aside to say, "Heard about the split. You doing all right?" I said, "Better than my electric bill now that nobody's steaming bath towels for sport." I didn't throw myself into new hobbies. I didn't sign up for a fitness class or learn how to bake. I didn't do any of the usual post-breakup things people talk about like they're cures for chronic confusion. I just started paying attention to the parts of my life that didn't need translating anymore. The bedroom stayed clean. Not museum-level clean, but reasonable for a guy who never saw the point in throw pillows. I moved her wooden sculptures out of the office. Not to be cruel. I just didn't need 6 versions of Julian's cheekbones judging me from different corners of the room. I put them in the attic. Labeled the box with faces, Deb's face. What surprised me most was how fast normal started to feel normal again. Not better. Not worse. Just less crowded. I found myself remembering things without editing them. The time we got lost in Columbus and argued over whose phone had better signal. The time she tried to wax the kitchen floor, and we both ended up sliding into the pantry. I didn't feel sad remembering those things. I didn't feel much at all, really. Just the quiet sense that those moments belonged to someone else's movie. One afternoon, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a postcard. On the front, a picture of a lighthouse. On the back, in small, neat handwriting. "I'm not proud of how I handled things. I hope you find what fits. D." No signature. No apology. Just that. I stared at it for a while, then put it on the fridge. Not because I forgave her. Not because I needed a reminder. Just because it felt honest, and I didn't have much of that in the kitchen anymore. Months passed. Seasons changed. My neighbor tried to get me to attend a local trivia night. I said no the first 3 times. Eventually, I went. I answered one question correctly, something about the capital of Delaware, and the host gave me a pencil. Progress. One night, I walked past the garage and flipped on the light. Everything was still where I'd left it. The bench, the boxes, the dust. I stared at the tools. Then I sat down, picked up a piece of scrap wood, and started carving. I wasn't trying to make anything meaningful. I wasn't looking for a metaphor. I just wanted to see if I could make something without overthinking it. An hour later, I had something that vaguely resembled a chair leg. I called it a win. There was no grand lesson in all this. No inspirational summary. Just a slow, strange process of cleaning up a life you didn't know was cluttered until someone else moved out. Deborah never came back. I didn't expect her to. I didn't want her to. But if I ever see her again, I'll probably thank her. Not because she made me stronger or wiser or whatever nonsense people write on mugs, but because she made space. And I finally figured out what to do with it. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel